Hey everybody, how are you doing? I hope your studies are going smoothly. Today we're here to discuss my top 5 picks for studies to learn for AQA A-level Psychology Paper 1. Couple of things before we start. I'm not going to include the key studies. Not much point in that because you have to know them anyway. And there's more than 5 anyway. Yeah. I'm picking studies that are going to be really useful for you to learn because you can use them in a variety of ways. Yeah. So I'm going to pick studies with versatility. All right. Let's do it. Number 5 is Baddeley's Encoding study. 2 word lists, one that sounds the same, one that means the same. Test them in the short term, they struggle with the ones that sound the same. Test them in the long term, they struggle with ones that mean the same. Yeah, he demonstrated that STM encodes acoustically, LTM encodes semantically. So it's really useful for questions on encoding. You can also use this study to deal with a question asking you to distinguish between or to, talk about how research has shown differences between the STM and the LTM. And it's also useful for application and research methods questions. I've definitely seen questions in the past giving you a little scenario where you've got acoustically similar words or semantically similar words, and you're asked to use your knowledge of encoding to explain the likely impact or explain the findings, that sort of thing. Yeah. So do have a look at this one. Pick number 4, the case of HM, or CW, Clive Wearing, if you prefer. They're similar enough, it doesn't matter. But either of these really useful to know for questions on the multi-store model. So you can use the findings to talk about how LTM and STM are different, they're separate. But you can also use this case to talk about types of LTM. So with HM, for example, talk about procedural memory. He learned mirror writing or mirror drawing, but he couldn't recall doctors' names and the fact that he'd seen them. So that semantic and episodic memory wasn't there, yeah? So you can use it to evaluate types of LTM or illustrate the types. And again, useful to be aware of for application and research methods questions. I'm sure I've seen questions in the past on case studies and how useful or not they are in memory. So having an actual case study in your mind when you're dealing with a question like that is probably really helpful. Number 3 is Linkenbach and Perkins' Montana Drink Drive study, the self-report study of drink driving in students around the campus. And a really good one to know for questions about social processes and social change. So that's about the process of conformity and how that brings about social change through social norms intervention. Good as well for evaluating explanations of conformity. You can use this to support the concept of normative social influence. You can also use this to discuss the real-world application of theories like that. You might get a relatively vague question on impact of social psychology on the economy as well. So this would be a good example to have in the back of your mind for that. So that's a useful one. Pick number 2 is the Huffling obedient nurses study. This is the one where they had a doctor they never heard of phone them up, and all of them apart from one delivered an unknown potentially lethal drug to a patient. Okay, really useful in social influence. You can use it as a strength of Milgram to show that his findings might apply in other contexts. You can use this to criticize agentic state theory, because that theory, don't forget, says that you should, when you've passed off that responsibility to the authority figure, you should experience this kind of moral strain, this sense of this stress. And the nurses didn't. So that undermines agentic state theory. Moving to variables affecting obedience, you can use this study there as well. Proximity, remember that the further away from the authority figure that you are, the lower obedience should be. Well, this study was done over the phone, and obedience was even higher than in Milgram's baseline study. So this undermines the role of proximity in obedience. It does, however, support the role of location, yeah? So Milgram, don't forget, found that in that prestigious environment of Yale University, people kind of looked up to the experimenter, they saw them as a legitimate authority figure, they obeyed. Well, this is supporting that, yeah? In that hospital context, that doctor on the phone being perceived as that credible figure, yeah, a legitimate authority backed by, this institution, yeah, the location, that's a strength. You could use it there as well. Pick number 1 is It's got to go to Schaefer and Emerson. Yeah, their Glasgow Babe study in the 1960s on working class families. Mixed methods, bit of self-report, bit of observation, but it's so useful in paper 1. You can use it to evaluate the stages of attachment. Those stages partially came from that Glasgow Babe study, so you can use it as strength in terms of research support, or the fact that it's based on empirical data, observations, that sort of thing. But limitation, you can say that the theory is based on this biased or unrepresentative sample. It's based on partial self-report methods and undermine the theory that way. So if you get a discussion question on the stage theory of attachment, really good one to know, despite it not being a key study. Also, really helpful for Bowlby's monotropic theory or evolutionary theory. Yeah. So one of the conclusions from Schaefer and Emerson's study is the fact that multiple attachments were being formed. Well, this undermines the idea of monotropy, doesn't it? Yeah. Monotropic, remember, is about one single special bond. So you could use this to challenge the idea of monotropy. Possibly learning theory you could use to support, actually. Schaefer and Emerson found that the person that was doing the day-to-day care, the feeding, the person that stayed with them, was largely the person that had that primary attachment bond. So that is in line with what learning theory would predict, because that, don't forget, would say that the more conditioning opportunities that a child has with an adult, the more that attachment should form. Also helpful to be aware of for application and research methods questions. You might well have something on, for example, self-report or questionnaires, interviews, that sort of thing, in the context of attachment. Yeah, I'm sure I've seen a question along the lines of, discuss or talk about a limitation of, getting mothers to report on their own children. So this is helpful to have in your mind for that. I am going to have an honourable mention today, and it's going to Harry Barrick and his LTM study. Yeah, the one where he asked them to recall people that they went to school with using the yearbooks. Yeah, didn't quite make it. It could have beat badly in at position 5, but I've whacked it on here as a bonus one for you. Really useful for talking about properties of LTM, so duration, types of LTM possibly as well, because you've got this idea of the semantic side of it, so recalling their names. And maybe you could talk about how an episodic might be their actual kind of recall of what it was like there, or specific events there. But you could link this into cues as well. He used two different or several different kind of recall opportunities for them. One of the things was recognition, so just name the face, versus free recall, which is just tell me all the names that you can remember. So you could talk about how having a face or having a name there might cue or act as a cue for recall. So you could use it potentially there as well. All right. And there you have it. Those are my top 5 studies to learn for AQA A-level Psychology Paper 1. Do you agree? What would you add? What would you change? Do you know them all? Never heard of any? Let me know in the comments. Cheers, guys. Hope that was useful for you. See you soon. Bish bash bosh.